Here's an AMI This Week shortcut with Alex Smyth.
When living with a disability, there are so many changes and adaptations that are needed to help navigate daily living. While many of these adaptations are obvious, some are more subtle, including the clothes we wear. As Anita Kaiser explains.
I think if you think about standard clothing, it's really designed for people when they're standing up. So especially when you think of pants, right? When you sit down with your pants, usually the legs ride up a bit, the back might, roll down a bit, but people aren't overly concerned because you're usually sitting at a desk, so your legs are hiding under a table. But for someone who's sitting all the time, you want to make sure that the clothing is fitted well in a seated position. And so that's why it's really important. The other thing too is, especially for those of us who have limited hand function, having clothing that's designed so that we'll be able to use it independently with our limited hand function is really important, because you always want to be as independent as possible with all of your activities of daily living, and that includes getting dressed.
This was something that renowned fashion designer Izzy Camilleri first learned about years ago, when a chance encounter with a wheelchair user introduced her to the issue of adaptive clothing.
It was just really eye-opening, and I had no idea that people that live with a physical disability have different clothing needs than myself, or that clothing was sometimes either challenging to get on or impossible to get on. So as a, personally, I just became so much more compassionate for people living with a physical disability, because I just had no idea.
As Izzy learned more about adaptive clothing, the more she realized that something had to be done. Thus, the Is Adaptive line was born.
When I started to do some research on it, everything that was coming up was clothing for the elderly or for people living in long-term care facilities. And it did lack style, and it lacked fit as well. Everything was very big and roomy. It was out of very cheap fabrics and, just really dated. And at that time, when I was kind of doing this research, I also learned that 84% of people that become paralyzed and break their back are between the ages of 18 and 34. And so they don't want to be dressing like their grandmother. So there was really nothing out there.
Anita was among that 84% and struggled post-injury to find clothes that were functional, but also stylish.
I have an identical twin sister. And so I think one of the biggest challenges for me was navigating myself after my injury, because I almost had my sister was sort of like the before and then I was the after. And so I found that a lot of our nicer clothes, because we often shared clothes too. So I found a lot of the nicer clothes just did not sit well in a wheelchair. And I ended up in a seated position. And I ended up resorting to wearing a lot of t-shirts and track pants and just the really more dowdy clothes, I would say. And it was really frustrating because whenever we go out, I was still young. I was in my, early 20s. And so you want to go out, you want to look good and feel great. And I remember one of the first times she was helping me to get ready to go out, and I just burst into tears because I felt so uncomfortable in the clothes that I was wearing. It ruins your whole mood and you just don't even want to go out and enjoy yourself.
For Izzy, the process of making adaptive clothes was new, as the forms and positions of traditional clothing were completely different.
Designing from a seated perspective is actually part of the hardest part. Working out, how do I design a coat that will cover the lap, only go to the back of the chair or your seat at the back. It kind of has to be designed almost with dimension, like an L shape, and it's bottomless. So again, understanding the challenges and then finding the solutions.
But Izzy did manage to make those forms work, and has grown her Is Adaptive line over the years to include many different styles and cuts, depending on accessibility needs. Something Anita is grateful for.
I've gone back and I still have a few pieces of pants that, that were store bought. And I'll once in a while go back and put them on, and I realize why I'm not wearing them anymore and go back to Izzy's. And I don't know why. I think I still hold on to them for whatever reason, I guess as a reminder or something. But like her it's such a huge difference in fit and style. Feeling comfortable in your clothes is so important just for your own psychological well-being. So being able to put on clothes that fit good and look good, make you feel good, and like I said, it just sets your day off on the right track.
Izzy's newest line, Game Changers, along with her staples, are available at izadaptive.com.